The scorching sun beat down mercilessly on the rugged terrain of the Arizona Territory, where dust devils danced across the barren landscape like ghostly apparitions. In this unforgiving wilderness, where only the strongest survived and fortunes were made or lost with a single swing of a pickaxe, there lived a man whose destiny would soon intertwine with forces beyond his comprehension. Samuel "Sam" Morrison had been working the mines for nearly 15 years. His weathered hands bearing the scars of countless hours spent chipping away at stubborn rock faces. His beard, once a rich brown, had turned gray from the constant exposure to dust and grime. The lines etched deep into his face told stories of hardship, loss, and an unwavering determination that had kept him alive when lesser men had given up and returned east. Before I continue with Sam's incredible story, I'd love for you to subscribe to our channel and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. Your support means the world to us, and I'm always curious to know where our amazing viewers are located around the globe. Sam had arrived in Arizona with nothing but a worn-out mule named Bessie, a set of mining tools inherited from his deceased father, and dreams bigger than the vast desert sky. His wife Martha had died of consumption back in Missouri, leaving him with memories too painful to bear and a desperate need to start fresh somewhere far from civilization. The gold rush had called to him like a siren's song, promising wealth and a chance to rebuild his shattered life. For years, Sam had worked various claims throughout the territory, sometimes striking small veins that provided just enough to keep him fed and equipped, but never the motherlode that would change everything. He had watched other miners strike it rich, seen them celebrate in the saloons of nearby Tombstone before disappearing forever, either killed by bandits on their way east or consumed by the very vices their newfound wealth had afforded them. But Sam was different. He was methodical, patient, and most importantly, he had learned to read the land in ways that younger, more impetuous miners never bothered to master. He could tell by the color of the rock, the way water flowed through certain crevices, and even the behavior of desert animals where precious metals might be hiding beneath the surface. It was on a particularly brutal Tuesday morning in late September when Sam made the discovery that would change his life forever. He had been working a new claim high up in the Dragoon Mountains, a treacherous area where Apache warriors still roamed and where most miners feared to venture alone. The isolation suited Sam perfectly. He preferred the company of his own thoughts to the constant chatter and competition of the more populated mining camps. As his pickaxe struck the rock face for what felt like the 1,000th time that morning, something unusual caught his eye. Instead of the typical dull gray stone he had been chipping away at for weeks, there was a glimmer of something that made his heart skip a beat. Gold. Not just traces or small flakes, but what appeared to be a substantial vein running deep into the mountain. Sam's hands trembled as he carefully extracted a piece of the ore, holding it up to the sunlight. The metal gleamed with an intensity that seemed almost supernatural, as if it possessed an inner fire that burned brighter than any gold he had ever seen before. This wasn't just any ordinary strike. This was the kind of discovery that legends were made of. The kind that could make a man wealthy beyond his wildest dreams. The excitement coursed through his veins like liquid fire as he began to calculate the potential value of what lay before him. Based on the size and richness of the vein, he estimated there could be enough gold here to buy a mansion in San Francisco, perhaps even enough to purchase his own railroad. All those years of backbreaking labor, all those nights spent sleeping on hard ground under the stars, all the loneliness and hardship, it had all been leading to this moment. But as Sam stood there, mesmerized by his discovery, he became aware of a presence behind him. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, and he slowly turned around, his hand instinctively moving toward the Colt .45 holstered at his hip. What he saw made him freeze in place, his breath catching in his throat. An elderly Apache woman stood not 20 feet away, her dark eyes fixed upon him with an intensity that seemed to pierce straight through to his soul. She was small in stature, probably no more than 5 feet tall. But there was something about her presence that commanded respect and inspired a deep, primal fear. Her long gray hair was braided with feathers and small bones, and her weathered face bore intricate tattoos that spoke of a lifetime spent in communion with spirits and forces that white men could never understand. She wore traditional Apache clothing, a buckskin dress decorated with beadwork and silver ornaments that caught the sunlight as she moved. Around her neck hung multiple necklaces made from turquoise, silver, and what appeared to be animal teeth. But it was her eyes that truly unsettled Sam. They seemed ancient, as if they had witnessed centuries of human folly and tragedy. The woman raised one gnarled hand and pointed directly at the gold vein Sam had just discovered. When she spoke, her voice was like the whisper of wind through dry leaves, carrying with it the weight of prophecy and doom. "That gold brings curse," she said in heavily accented English, her words slow and deliberate. "Many men die for that metal. Blood soaks the earth where it is taken. You dig there, you wake angry spirits. They know rest until debt is paid." Sam felt a chill run down his spine, despite the oppressive heat of the desert sun. He had heard stories about Apache shamans and their supposed ability to commune with the spirit world, but he had always dismissed such tales as superstitious nonsense. Yet standing here, face to face with this mysterious woman, he found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about the world. The rational part of his mind told him to ignore her warning. After all, what could an old Indian woman possibly know about mining or geology? This was his claim, legally filed and registered with the territorial government. He had every right to extract whatever minerals lay beneath the surface, and no amount of primitive superstition was going to stop him from claiming his rightful fortune. But another part of him, a deeper, more instinctive part that had kept him alive through countless dangers in the wilderness, whispered that perhaps he should listen. There was something about the woman's manner, the absolute certainty in her voice, that suggested she knew things that went far beyond the understanding of ordinary mortals. The Apache woman continued to stare at him for several long moments, her expression unreadable. Then, without another word, she turned and began walking away, her movements surprisingly graceful for someone of her apparent age. Within minutes, she had disappeared among the rocks and scrub brush, leaving Sam to wonder if the entire encounter had been nothing more than a heat-induced hallucination. Sam stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where the woman had vanished, his mind racing with conflicting thoughts and emotions. The gold vein gleamed mockingly in the sunlight, its beauty now somehow tainted by the ominous warning he had received. He thought about Martha, about the life they had planned together before consumption had stolen her away. He thought about all the years of struggle and hardship, all the dreams deferred and hopes crushed by circumstance and bad luck. This was his chance, perhaps his only chance, to finally achieve the prosperity and security that had eluded him for so long. How could he possibly walk away from such an opportunity based on the cryptic warnings of a stranger? Yet the woman's words echoed in his mind like a funeral bell, filling him with a sense of foreboding that he couldn't shake. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, Sam made his decision. He would continue working the claim, but he would be careful. He would take only what he needed to secure his future, nothing more. Surely there could be no harm in that. After all, he reasoned, every mining operation involved some degree of risk. Men died in cave-ins, from gas explosions, from accidents with dynamite. The Apache woman's warning was probably nothing more than a general acknowledgement of the dangers inherent in his profession. With renewed determination, Sam gathered his tools and began preparing for the next day's work. He would need to blast through several feet of solid rock to reach the main vein, which meant he would have to make a trip to Tombstone to purchase dynamite and blasting caps. The thought of leaving his claim unguarded, even for a day, filled him with anxiety. But there was no alternative. The gold wasn't going anywhere, and he needed the proper equipment to extract it safely and efficiently. That night, as Sam sat by his campfire, eating a simple meal of beans and hardtack, he found himself constantly scanning the darkness beyond the circle of firelight. Every sound, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of wind through the brush, the distant howl of a coyote, seemed magnified and somehow threatening. He told himself it was just nerves, the natural excitement and anxiety that came with making such a significant discovery. But deep down, he knew it was something more. The Apache woman's warning had planted a seed of doubt in his mind that continued to grow with each passing hour. He had spent enough time in Apache territory to know that their spiritual beliefs were not to be taken lightly. These were a people who had survived in one of the harshest environments on Earth for countless generations, and their understanding of the natural world was both profound and practical. As he finally settled down to sleep, wrapping himself in his worn blanket beneath a canopy of brilliant stars, Sam made a silent promise to himself. He would be cautious, he would be respectful, and he would take only what he needed. Surely the spirits, if they truly existed, would understand that he was not a greedy man seeking to rape the earth for profit, but simply a lonely widower trying to build a better life for himself. But even as he made this promise, Sam couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to set in motion events that would spiral far beyond his control. The gold called to him like a siren song, its promise of wealth and security, drowning out the voice of caution that whispered in the back of his mind. Tomorrow, he would begin the process that would either make him the richest man in the territory or fulfill the Apache woman's dark prophecy. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with not a cloud in the azure sky. Sam rose before sunrise, as was his custom, and prepared for the journey to Tombstone. The ride would take most of the day, but he was eager to purchase the supplies he needed and return to his claim as quickly as possible. Every moment away from the gold vein felt like a moment wasted, and he was anxious to begin the extraction process. As he saddled Bessie and loaded his saddlebags with the few personal items he couldn't afford to leave behind, Sam took one last look at the rock face where his fortune lay hidden. In the early morning light, the exposed vein seemed to glow with an inner fire, as if the metal itself was alive and aware of his intentions. For a brief moment, he thought he heard something, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to come from deep within the earth itself. But when he paused to listen more carefully, there was nothing but the whisper of wind through the canyon. The ride to Tombstone was uneventful, though Sam found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, half expecting to see the Apache woman watching him from some distant ridge. The town was bustling with its usual mixture of miners, cowboys, gamblers, and merchants, all pursuing their own versions of the American dream in this harsh and unforgiving land. At the general store, Sam purchased 50 pounds of dynamite, along with blasting caps, fuse, and other necessary supplies. The store owner, a grizzled veteran of numerous mining operations, offered advice on the proper techniques for blasting in hard rock formations. Sam listened carefully, knowing that one mistake with explosives could end his dreams and his life in an instant. "You working alone out there?" the store owner asked as he wrapped the dynamite in oiled cloth. "That's dangerous country, especially with all the Apache activity lately. Heard tell there's been some strange happenings up in the Dragoons. Lights in the sky, weird sounds coming from the mountains. Probably just miners working night shifts. But you can never be too careful." Sam felt a chill run down his spine at the mention of strange happenings, but he forced himself to remain calm. "I can take care of myself," he replied, patting the gun at his hip. "Been working these mountains for years without any trouble." The store owner shrugged and handed over the supplies. "Your funeral, friend. Just remember, ain't no amount of gold worth dying for." As Sam loaded his purchases onto Bessie's back, those words echoed in his mind with uncomfortable clarity. Between the Apache woman's warning and the store owner's casual comment about death, it seemed as if the entire universe was trying to tell him something. But the lure of the gold was too strong to resist, and he pushed such thoughts aside as he began the long journey back to his claim. The return trip took longer than expected, as Bessie was heavily loaded and the trail was treacherous in several places. By the time Sam reached his campsite, the sun was already setting, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold. He decided to wait until morning before beginning the blasting operation, partly because he wanted to work in good light, but mostly because something about the approaching darkness filled him with an inexplicable sense of dread. That night, Sam's sleep was troubled by vivid and disturbing dreams. He saw vast underground caverns filled with glittering gold, but the metal was stained with blood and surrounded by the bones of countless miners who had died trying to claim it. He heard voices calling to him from deep within the earth, some pleading for help, others warning him to stay away. And through it all, he saw the face of the Apache woman, her ancient eyes filled with a sadness that seemed to encompass all the suffering and greed of humanity. Sam woke several times during the night, his heart pounding and his body covered in cold sweat. Each time, he told himself it was just nerves, just the natural anxiety that came with undertaking such a dangerous operation. But deep down, he knew it was something more, a warning from forces beyond his understanding that he was about to make a terrible mistake. When morning finally arrived, Sam forced himself to go through his usual routine of preparing breakfast and checking his equipment. But his hands shook as he handled the dynamite, and he found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, as if expecting to see the Apache woman standing there with her knowing, sorrowful eyes. The blasting operation itself was relatively straightforward. Sam had done similar work dozens of times before, and he knew exactly how much explosive to use and where to place it for maximum effect. He drilled several holes in the rock face, carefully inserted the dynamite charges, and connected them with a long fuse that would give him plenty of time to reach a safe distance before the explosion. As he lit the fuse and began running toward the shelter he had prepared behind a large boulder, Sam felt a strange mixture of excitement and terror. In just a few moments, the blast would open up the rock face and reveal the full extent of his discovery. He would finally know whether he had found a small pocket of gold or a vein rich enough to make him wealthy beyond his wildest dreams. But as he crouched behind the boulder, waiting for the explosion, Sam became aware of a presence nearby. He turned his head and saw, to his amazement and horror, the Apache woman standing just a few yards away. She was looking directly at him, her expression one of infinite sadness and resignation. "You no listen," she said softly, her voice barely audible above the hissing of the burning fuse. "Now spirits wake. Now curse begin." Before Sam could respond, the world exploded in a thunderous roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. But this was no ordinary mining blast. The explosion was far more powerful than anything Sam's modest charges could have produced. The entire mountainside seemed to convulse and heave, as if some enormous creature trapped beneath the surface was struggling to break free. Rocks the size of houses tumbled down the canyon walls, and a cloud of dust and debris rose into the air like a miniature mushroom cloud. The sound was deafening, a continuous rumble that seemed to go on forever, punctuated by the crash of falling stone and the groaning of the earth itself. When the dust finally settled and the echoes of the explosion faded away, Sam emerged from his shelter to survey the devastation. What he saw filled him with a mixture of awe and terror that would haunt him for the rest of his days. The rock face where he had been working was completely gone, replaced by a gaping hole that seemed to descend into the very bowels of the earth. But this was no ordinary mine shaft. The opening pulsed with an eerie, golden light that seemed to come from somewhere far below, and the air that rose from its depths carried with it the smell of sulfur and something else, something ancient and corrupt that made Sam's stomach turn. As he stood there, transfixed by the sight before him, Sam began to hear sounds coming from the depths of the newly opened cavern. At first, they were faint and indistinct, like the whisper of wind through distant tunnels. But gradually, they grew louder and more distinct, until he could make out what sounded like voices. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of voices, all crying out in anguish and despair. The Apache woman appeared beside him, as if she had materialized out of thin air. Her face was grave, but there was no surprise in her expression, only the weary resignation of someone who had seen this tragedy play out many times before. "Sacred place," she explained, gesturing toward the glowing opening. "Burial ground of ancient ones. Gold is their bones, their blood. You disturb their rest, they no forgive." Sam felt his knees go weak as the full implications of what he had done began to sink in. He had not simply discovered a rich vein of gold. He had desecrated a sacred burial site, awakening spirits that had been at rest for countless centuries. The voices rising from the depths were not the product of his imagination or the effects of the explosion. They were the cries of the dead, demanding justice for the violation of their eternal resting place. "What have I done?" Sam whispered, his voice barely audible above the growing chorus of supernatural voices. "How do I make this right?" The Apache woman looked at him with eyes that held both pity and condemnation. "Too late for making right," she said sadly. "Spirits angry now. They want payment for what you take, for what you disturb. Only way to stop curse is to give back what you steal, plus price for your disrespect." "But I haven't taken anything yet," Sam protested, though even as he spoke the words, he knew they were meaningless. The very act of blasting open the burial site had been theft enough in the eyes of the spirits. "You take their peace," the woman replied. "You take their sacred rest. Now they take from you." As if summoned by her words, the golden light emanating from the cavern began to intensify, and the voices of the dead grew louder and more insistent. Sam could feel something stirring in the depths below, something vast and terrible that was slowly awakening after eons of slumber. The ground beneath his feet began to tremble, and cracks appeared in the surrounding rock faces. Dust and small stones rained down from above, and in the distance, Sam could hear the sound of other explosions, as if his initial blast had triggered a chain reaction that was spreading throughout the mountain range. "The mountain spirits wake," the Apache woman said, her voice filled with a mixture of fear and reverence. "They feel the pain of their children, the desecration of sacred ground. Now they come to reclaim what is theirs and punish those who would steal from the dead." Sam looked around desperately, searching for some way to escape the supernatural forces he had unleashed. But even as he considered fleeing, he realized that running would be futile. The curse had been set in motion, and there would be no escaping its consequences. The voices from the cavern were growing louder by the moment, and now Sam could make out individual words in a language he didn't recognize, but somehow understood. They were calling his name, demanding that he come down into the depths to face judgment for his crimes against the sacred dead. "Is there nothing I can do?" Sam asked the Apache woman, desperation evident in his voice. "No way to appease the spirits? To make amends for what I've done?" The woman considered his question for a long moment, her ancient eyes studying his face, as if searching for something, perhaps a glimmer of genuine remorse, or the kind of spiritual understanding that might make redemption possible. "Maybe," she said finally, "but price is high. You must give up everything, your claim, your tools, your dreams of wealth. You must leave this place and never return. And you must spend rest of your life serving the spirits, protecting sacred places from others who would disturb them." Sam felt his heart sink as he contemplated the magnitude of what she was asking. To give up his claim meant abandoning not just his dreams of wealth, but his entire reason for being in this harsh and unforgiving land. Without the prospect of striking it rich, what purpose would his life have? What reason would there be to continue struggling against the hardships and dangers of frontier existence? But even as these thoughts raced through his mind, Sam became aware that the supernatural activity around him was intensifying. The golden light from the cavern was now so bright that it hurt to look at directly, and the voices of the dead had become a deafening chorus that seemed to reverberate through his very bones. More disturbing still, Sam began to see shapes moving in the light, translucent figures that seemed to be climbing up from the depths of the earth. They were human in form, but somehow wrong, as if death had changed them in fundamental ways that made them no longer entirely of this world. "Choose quickly," the Apache woman urged, her voice barely audible above the supernatural cacophony. "Spirits grow impatient. Soon they no longer listen to reason." Sam closed his eyes and tried to think clearly, but the noise and the otherworldly presence of the awakened dead made rational thought nearly impossible. He thought of Martha, of the life they had planned together, of all the dreams that had died with her. He thought of the years of backbreaking labor, the loneliness, the constant struggle just to survive in this hostile environment. And then he thought of the gold, still gleaming somewhere in the depths below, calling to him with its promise of wealth and security. Even now, even with the evidence of supernatural forces arrayed against him, the lure of that precious metal was almost irresistible. But as Sam opened his eyes and saw the ghostly figures emerging from the cavern, their faces twisted with rage, and their ethereal hands reaching toward him with obvious malevolent intent, he realized that some prices were simply too high to pay. No amount of gold was worth spending eternity as the plaything of vengeful spirits. "I'll do it," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "I'll give up the claim. Leave this place. Do whatever the spirits require. Just please, make them stop." The Apache woman nodded solemnly and began to chant in her native language, her voice rising and falling in a complex rhythm that seemed to resonate with the supernatural forces surrounding them. Gradually, the golden light began to dim, and the voices of the dead grew quieter, though they did not entirely cease. "Spirits hear your words," she said when her chanting was complete. "But words not enough. You must prove your sincerity with actions. Take nothing from this place. No gold, no tools, nothing that might carry curse with you. Walk away now and never return." Sam looked around at his campsite, at the mining equipment that represented years of savings and hard work, at the simple possessions that were all he had left in the world. To leave everything behind would mean starting over with absolutely nothing, becoming a penniless wanderer in a land that showed no mercy to the weak or unprepared. But as he hesitated, the supernatural activity began to intensify again, and Sam realized that the spirit's patience was wearing thin. The ghostly figures were moving closer, their ethereal forms becoming more solid and threatening with each passing moment. Without another word, Sam turned and began walking away from his claim, leaving behind everything he owned except the clothes on his back and the gun at his hip. Each step was agony, not just because he was abandoning his life's work, but because he could feel the weight of the spirit's attention upon him, judging his every move and emotion. Behind him, the Apache woman continued her chanting, and gradually the supernatural disturbances began to subside. The golden light faded to a dim glow, the voices of the dead became whispers, and the ghostly figures retreated back into the depths from whence they had come. But even as the immediate danger passed, Sam knew that his ordeal was far from over. The curse had been awakened, and while the spirits might be temporarily appeased by his sacrifice, they would be watching him for the rest of his life, ready to exact terrible vengeance if he ever again succumbed to the lure of forbidden wealth. As Sam walked through the desert, leaving behind everything he had worked for and dreamed of, he reflected on the hard lesson he had learned. In his greed and desperation, he had violated something sacred and ancient, awakening forces that were far beyond his understanding or control. The gold that had promised to solve all his problems had instead brought him face to face with powers that could destroy not just his body, but his very soul. The Apache woman's warning had been clear from the beginning. The gold carried a curse, and those who sought to claim it would pay a price far greater than any treasure could be worth. Sam had chosen to ignore that warning, convinced that his need was greater than any supernatural threat. And now he was paying the consequences of that decision. As the sun set behind him and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Sam Morrison began the long journey toward an uncertain future. He had lost everything: his claim, his possessions, his dreams of wealth and security. But perhaps, in losing everything, he had also gained something valuable: the knowledge that some things in this world were more important than gold, and that the pursuit of wealth at any cost could lead to consequences far worse than poverty. The desert stretched out before him, vast and unforgiving, but Sam no longer felt the crushing weight of despair that had driven him to seek his fortune in the first place. He had faced the supernatural forces of the earth itself and survived. And while his future was uncertain, he knew that he would never again be tempted by the false promise of easy wealth. Behind him, the mountain where he had made his discovery stood silent and dark, its secrets once again hidden from the world of men. But deep within its depths, the spirits of the ancient dead kept their eternal vigil, waiting for the next foolish mortal who would dare to disturb their sacred rest in pursuit of cursed gold. And in the years that followed, as word spread of the strange explosion in the Dragoon Mountains and the mysterious disappearance of Sam Morrison's mining operation, other prospectors would come seeking the legendary vein of gold that was said to lie hidden somewhere in those treacherous peaks. But none would find it, for the Apache woman and others like her would be watching, ready to warn away those who might listen, and to call upon the spirits to deal with those who would not. The curse of the sacred gold would remain, a reminder that some treasures are too dangerous to claim, and that the earth itself will defend its most precious secrets against those who would violate them for personal gain. And somewhere in the vast wilderness of the American West, Sam Morrison continued his journey, forever changed by his encounter with forces beyond the understanding of mortal men, carrying with him the knowledge that true wealth could never be measured in gold.